Thank you for coming to another anti-corruption conference, 15th in a row that we organized to commemorate the International Anti-Corruption Day, when we use this opportunity to discuss some crucial concerns and issues. It is great pleasure to have the panel, such distinguished panel of speakers, and all the panels that we have today. And I want to say that there is a great hope that will successfully fight corruption. And as I have the Speaker of the Parliament with us, I want to say how pleased I am that we have a woman speaker opening this conference. Thank you, Ms. Ćalović. Dear Excellencies, dear Ms. Ćalović Marković, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to open this conference, anti-corruption conference, organized by MANS. I want to say that having such a conference is important, and I want to thank them not only for inviting us, but also for what I've been doing in our society in fighting corruption, as corruption is the hurdle for development of a stable and developed environment for living and doing business. And for that, it is important to understand here the context in which we work. And this is a long period of transition and democratic consolidation of institutions that hasn't been completed yet. I want to use this opportunity to remind you that the Parliament, at its 24th convocation, adopted a decision to amend the rules of procedure for the Parliament and envisaged to set up the new working body, and that is Committee for Anti-Corruption Committee. That is one step in direction of fighting corruption from our side. And this committee discusses these issues, proposes measures to develop such as action plans and documents, addresses complaints and grudges of our citizens. And in 2021, we had 4 sessions in the committee, and they discussed 16 items on the agenda. They had, as of then until November 22, we only had 2 sessions and 3 items on the agenda, which is to say that this committee has not been operating well, and I think that all MPs have to consider having sessions more frequently and adopting the rules and procedures and acts in fighting corruption, scaling down corruption, and etc. At the proposal of the Committee for Anti-Corruption Committee, they have proposed amendment to the law, anti-corruption law, and as Speaker, I also summoned a meeting to discuss this proposal on 16th December in a couple of days. Corruption is a big problem. It has been prominent and present so much that it affects everyday living models and leaves enormous trace on business, doing business, and can be a hurdle to foreign direct investments and in general development of economy. Corruption in the health sector, in administration in general, was a topic on the agenda for discussed by the Parliament in general in plenary, and that is why we believe that it merits a full and comprehensive discussion to contribute from our side to fighting this phenomenon that has been burden to our society for many years now. It is a chronic problem, and we have inherited it as such, and we have to come to grips with that and to show track record, to make a good track record in this regard. And we have to have the entire society on board of that, because everyone needs to understand that it'll help improve their quality of life. And as such, corruption affects everyday patterns of lives, the everyday changes and procedures, customs paying, tax paying, the employment, health services. And so economic consequences are numerous. They actually prevent good investment activity, trade. It actually leads to the excessive expenses and expenditures. It gives rise to grey economy, and this is why we rely on recommendations of European Commission. However, our authorities have only partially met the requirements and recommendations. And as for Greco, it found that corruption is still a problem in Montenegro that brings doubt about that actually mars and affects the trust that people have in institutions. It mars the relations in every sphere of life. And what needs to be said is that that all government bodies and not only anti-corruption agency have to assume responsibility for their share to do something, and we need to have public officials leading by example and saying that corruption is not a good way, a good path to development, and that it is having the negative effects on our development. Corruption is a systemic issue, and in order to fight it, we need non-selective implementation and approach. We need good legal framework, and as we aspire to become a member of the EU, we can tolerate no more. And as Speaker of the Parliament, I'll make sure for myself on my side that we'll keep corruption on agenda, and that we will adopt the rules and procedures and laws that will go towards achieving that goal. I'm grateful for months that an NGO sector in general for raising awareness about that and for contributing to having good discussion in society. And this leads to good laws and good procedures. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much, and thank you for your wonderful word, for your nice words. I hope that we will contribute to practices of fighting corruption. We will talk about today about financing political parties, and Parliament is a crucial player in this. We are very grateful to have our ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Montenegro, Ms. Judy Reinke, with us. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Đurović, colleagues from the diplomatic community, friends from civil society, from government, from the public, from the press. Good morning, and thank you for letting me be part of this 15th annual MONS Anti-Corruption Conference. I've been a part of this program before, and I find this an important platform. Everyone in Montenegro should be listening today to the important messages that will be said during this conference. At the outset, I think it's important to note that today is, in fact, December 9th, International Anti-Corruption Day. This marks the entry into force of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption in 2005. It was a landmark event and it's one that binds us together in the fight against corruption. The convention upholds the right of all people to be represented by governments that are constituted through transparent, accountable, and fair processes. In the United States, my president, Joseph Biden, penned the very first ever US countering corruption strategy. And when he did that, he called corruption a cancer, a disease that eats at public trust and at the ability of governments to deliver for their citizens. He remarked that corruption exacerbates social, political, and economic inequality and polarization. It degrades the business environment and economic opportunity. It drives conflict, and importantly, it undermines faith in government. And I think these observations are just as relevant here in Montenegro. And I refer a lot to young people because an increasing number of young people express frustration with the lack of economic opportunities available to them and to their families, and frankly, do not trust government to deliver solutions. And in the 4 years I've had the honor of representing the United States in this wonderful country, I think about the young people, and those young people have a consistent set of messages, and they often speak about the fight against corruption, and that the full potential of Montenegro's future growth is challenged. It should be invested in the people. It should be invested in the young. It should be invested in all citizens, not a few corrupt individuals or criminal networks. So today, this platform provides us an opportunity to collectively reflect on how to convert those sentiments into a set of concrete actions. So using that as a starting point, let me turn to the role of political parties in a democracy, the overarching theme of today's conference. To be sure, political parties are a vital link between the people and the government. They are the means through which voters can identify candidates who represent their views and their aspirations. And they enable candidates of varying views to compete in elections. And to fulfill that role, political parties do require financial resources to develop coherent policy platforms, to build their organizational capabilities, and to share their message broadly with the citizens. Money, however, can also be used to distort the democratic process. It can be used as a tool to unfairly entice vulnerable voters, as well as to exert undue influence on parties and politicians to further interests of individuals over constituents. So to guard against the distorting effect of money that money can have on political parties and elections, independent oversight and enforcement of financial disclosure laws, together with strict management of conflicts of interest and lobbying, are essential. The key to countering the insidious effect of money on the political process is transparency. Indeed, transparency is of the utmost importance for the legitimacy of elections and building public trust in democratic institutions. To encourage a climate of open, free, and fair political competition, the public should have the ability to be aware of and to monitor potential conflicts of interest among candidates and elected officials. This includes reporting the sources of funding for political parties and elections so that the public can better understand the possible influence that such money could have on the development of public policy and their elected officials. In the United States and elsewhere, including here in Montenegro, political finance regulations do set caps on how much an individual can contribute to a political party or campaign. The limits are intended to limit efforts by private contributors to essentially buy influence in the political system. And similarly, both Montenegro, my own country, and many others have set limits on the amount and type of expenditures that political parties can spend on campaigns. As in the contribution limits, expenditure limits are another tool to ensure that money does not distort the political process. and transparency is the common thread that links these tools for mitigating the distorting influence money can play in the political process. Transparency, however, can only be achieved through the effective monitoring of compliance with national disclosure rules, contribution limits, expenditure caps, and other regulations to expose undisclosed conflicts of interest and other corrupt influences. My country, the United States, truly welcomes the efforts of the Anti-Corruption Agency, the State Audit Institution, and others to increase transparency, particularly as it relates to the financing of political parties. However, to be frank, it is a difficult and murky area, and the results to date have been limited. That's why today's discussion is so important. More efforts are needed to strengthen control mechanisms put in place by Montenegrin institutions and to ensure that political parties fully act on their recommendations in a more effective and transparent manner. Recognizing the importance of transparency and accountability in the context of financing political parties and campaigns, my country, the United States, is committed to supporting Montenegro and its responsible officials in their effort to root out violations of Montenegro's political financing laws and regulations. And I would like to call on political parties and all state institutions whose representatives have vowed to fight corruption to transform your words into action. Join with your civil society partners, like MONS, to increase transparency and accountability in financing of political parties and campaigns. And this includes adopting the recommendations of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, which have not been fully adopted. So in this way, Montenegro will advance as a democratic country and enhance its democratic values by fostering an inclusive political process grounded on public, not private interests. A political environment truly founded on the public good is the foundation for sustained prosperity and economic growth for all Montenegrins, and again, particularly for the youth. Today's conference provides a real opportunity for Montenegro to agree on actionable steps to counter corruption, to enhance trust in government, and to increase the chances of a brighter, more democratic future for this beautiful country. So I will say, let's invest in Montenegro's youth and Montenegro's future by taking steps now. Again, I thank you, and I wish you a very successful conference.
Hvala, Vaša Ekscelencija.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Without your support, professional, political, financial, and every other, we wouldn't be in position to fight for transparency and to achieve as much as we have so far. There is another partner without whom we couldn't make it so far. We couldn't have achieved anything, and that is the EU delegation to Montenegro. The head of the delegation is with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at what is the 15th National Anti-Corruption Conference on the occasion of this very special day, the International Anti-Corruption Day. Corruption is unfortunately widespread with both its domestic and international dimensions, and it contaminates every aspect of public life. But unduly influencing public proceedings, corruption leads to the misuse of public money and diverts energies and resources from the achievements of goals that should benefit the society as a whole. And that is why fighting against corruption is in the interest, first and foremost, before anything, of the people. When corruption happens in political financing, unregulated donations or abuses of state resources can undermine the integrity of elections as the pillar of any democratic system. And that is why transparency in political financing is one of the cornerstones of the EU anti-corruption agenda. The Commission's annual report on Montenegro, issued in October this year, states that in Montenegro, corruption is prevalent in many areas, including political party and election campaign financing. The report also acknowledges that some efforts have been made, however, results remain limited. This is mainly due to shortcomings in the legal framework where deficiencies observed so far still persist. So unless the legislation is made more clear, transparent, the bodies in charge of monitoring political financing will continue to be unable to carry out their mandate efficiently. The recommendations of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR, and the Council of Europe have not been addressed. Montenegro's alignment to existing best practices, be it on the standards of financial reporting or on effective safeguards and sanctions, remains very limited. So in order to move ahead and make the legal framework that regulates political parties funding more transparent, we need solid, well, you need solid political will of the political parties themselves in the first place. And in addition, you need the MPs who sit in parliament to act in full awareness of their role in implementing the anti-corruption agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, no single institution, as independent, as impartial, and proactive as it may be, can achieve significant lasting results by itself. It is not sufficient to have a watchdog. On political financing, an effective fight against corruption requires synergy between different state institutions and bodies, as well as civic awareness, trust, and attention from all the citizens. Combating corruption requires a solid legal framework, the existence of a proactive and independent monitoring body, a coherent response of the law enforcement and prosecution, independent and free media, and a committed and organized civil society. In other words, to sustain the efforts made so far and to make the fight against corruption more efficient at a systemic level, what Montenegro needs is a properly functioning rule of law. And you know that already, and it has been said many times. I'm going to repeat it today. Rule of law lies at the heart of EU values and is key for Montenegro to become a member of the EU. But what the EU needs to see is tangible progress as a matter of urgency. We need to see that Montenegro delivers on the reforms needed to make progress in the negotiating chapters 23 and 24. And for this, all political actors should work together constructively and take forward the EU-related reforms. A spirit of responsibility and a commitment to act in the interest of the citizens should prevail even at times of political tensions and confrontation. The EU will keep monitoring all developments on rule of law, including the fight against corruption, and we remain by your side in supporting the work ahead. That is why today's meeting is extremely important, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Hvala Vaša ekscelencijo, radujemo se zaista što je borba protiv korupcije jedan od ključnih prioriteta procesa.
Thanks, Your Excellency. It's good that fighting corruption is under the crucial part of the negotiation with the EU because a huge number of citizens want to join the EU. It's a pleasure to ask His Excellency Ambassador of Germany to Montenegro to address you. That's the state that has for years supported us with expertise and we will have the opportunity to hear some of them. So, Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Madam Speaker of the Parliament, Excellencies, Ministers and members of the Diplomatic Corps, dear colleagues, honorable members of Parliament, dear Vanja, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by congratulating MANS for their long-standing and tireless and very effective work to fight against corruption. Corruption is, as you said, Judy, a cancer that eats away on the body of the state, that undermines the effectiveness and efficiency of the state, and not least undermines the trust and the confidence that citizens should have in the state, which is their state. Of course, the state, its laws, rules, and regulations, its institutions and structures and processes must be designed in a way that prevents corruption to the extent possible. But let us not be naive. In the same way as in cyberspace, the criminal energy of man in this field is strong and the perpetrators are always one step faster and one step more ingenious than the state in finding new ways and means to achieve their evil goals, even if all representatives of the state acted in good faith, which is, as life shows, not the case. Therefore, the role of civil society in the fight against corruption is absolutely necessary. Monitoring, naming and shaming if necessary, advising, but also educating. Of course, big corruption starts from the top, but it is upheld and supported in practice also from the bottom. It is necessary that every citizen has in his mind that corruption and bribery are not some kind of cultural tradition, but are wrong, are a crime. And every state needs citizens that are ready to say no when asked for a bribe, that are ready to follow the rules instead of trying to pay their way ahead on the fast track, so to speak. Otherwise, the state is undermined from its foundations. I will not forget the conversation with the, let's say, grande dame of the human rights civil society in a country where I was recently posted, a great personality, also fighting corruption. But once she told me I needed a passport, but at the administration in our neighborhood, you can get a passport only if you pay a bribe. No bribe, no passport. What could I do? In the end, she said, I paid the bribe. I felt terrible, but I had no choice. So, ladies and gentlemen, it must not get that far. Therefore, strong anti-corruption education is needed, and strong civil society action against corruption is essentially important. But, ladies and gentlemen, this 15th Montenegrin National Anti-Corruption Conference is dedicated to a very specific theme, financing of political entities and election campaigns. And yes, political financing has always and everywhere been an area prone to the risk of major financial abuse. To go back to the basics, political parties have a very important role in the functioning of a representative parliamentary democracy. It is through them that voters' political will be transformed into policies, and it is through them and from them that the government is formed. But for a democracy to function effectively, political parties must do more than just being the mouthpiece of the voters. They must have something to offer to the electorate as well as to the state. Proposals for strategic orientation and for solutions to the problems the state is facing. Listening to the voters, yes, but also convincing voters of new ideas, new approaches, necessities, even if this is not always popular, that is to take a huge responsibility. But the basis of it all is the trust of the voters. Trust that the political parties conduct their business independently from hidden influence. Of course, political parties have a lobbying role for the interests of their voters, but this needs to be transparent. It is not permissible that political parties are instrumentalized by actors behind the scene to fulfill their business or other interests. And in this regard, party and election campaign financing has a decisive role. The German constitution explicitly says political parties must participate in the formation of the political will of the people, which implicitly means they have a job to do, which incurs costs. And acknowledging that, the constitution itself continues, parties have to give accountability on their income, expenses, and their assets. The relevant laws and rules and regulations detailing these provisions have undergone many changes since the foundation of the Federal Republic of Germany in reaction to party financing scandals, but also to calibrate and fine-tune the rules according to what we believe is the best mode of financing of parties. The principles are: parties must have the necessary financial means to fulfill their constitutional role, to participate in the formation of the political will of the people, that is, to do their job. Parties must not be dependent on a few big donors. It is positive that parties have members that pay member fees and thereby contribute to the financing of the parties. And parties should have a broad variety of income sources. Therefore, in Germany, the state participates in the funding of political parties, but not to an extent that they become predominantly state-sponsored and detached from the relevance that the voters attribute to their respective role. It must not be about artificially keeping political parties alive that have no longer a basis in the electorate. And state funding in a way that does not make state contributions to political parties dependent on the relationship between a specific party and the government which happens to be in power. Big donations also in Germany are limited and they must be made transparent. That is, the donor and the amount must be published. Small donations are welcome. They are a sign that the party is relevant to the voters. And financial contributions from voters to the parties are also a form of support to parliamentary democracy. Therefore, they are good. And for this reason, the state pays a proportional top-up on small donations. And finally, party membership is good because lively democracy requires active participation and activism. Therefore, membership fees are generously tax deductible. And as I said, party finances must be totally transparent. This is our model, but we are well aware that party finances are highly attractive for potentially corruptive practices. Therefore, constant monitoring and regular adaptation of the rules to changing realities is indispensable. I would hope that this conference today will contribute to coming up with good new ideas in the field relevant to Montenegro and to its political system, so that responsible politicians have food for thought on how to make Montenegro more corruption-proof, also in the field of political financing. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hvala Vaša ekscelencija i hvala vam što ste podijelili sa nama iskustvo Njemačke koja je
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thanks for sharing experience with Germany that had a lawful financing of political structure, but they sanctioned it firmly, which means that the corruption appears everywhere, but the matter is how institutions and states react to corruption. It's a pleasure to ask Her Excellency, Ambassador of the UK, because we have worked for years on different activities regarding anti-corruption, to address us. You have the floor. Dear Speaker of the Parliament, dear guests, good morning. I'm the last ambassador in the series that is addressing you, and I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have already said. So let me speak with the focus on the United Kingdom. I think it's well known that the British government, through our programs in Montenegro, has invested millions of pounds into strengthening fights against corruption and organized crime. Actually, the British Embassy has significantly extended in the last several years due to an expanding cooperation that we have with fighting corruption and organized crime. Corruption is the crucial lever of serious and organized crime. Due to criminal activities, we often face weaknesses in the institutions, and therefore it is important to fight corruption. We work on strengthening institutions in Montenegro, especially those institutions such as the state audit institution can ensure that government finances and assets are properly managed. We work with the partners here on strengthening legislative regulatory framework, for example, related to financial crime and confiscation of assets. Also, we work with the partners that can hold accountable those who are responsible for corruption. Those partners, including police and the Office of the Supreme State Prosecutor. Just like the other speakers have said, We all know the arguments for fighting corruption. Corruption means that the money that we have here, which is necessary for the healthcare, education, infrastructure, is transferred to the benefit of individuals. Corruption means the development of Montenegro and accession to the EU is slower than it should be, and people are getting poorer and poorer. Corruption means that the country has less developed and weaker institutions. Corruption makes you vulnerable when it threatens with the interference of your business and political situation. The fight against corruption should be in the interest of the government, no matter what party is in power. Corruption is not something that exists only in Montenegro. No state is resistant to corruption, but what makes a difference is a functional system of the rule of law, and primarily politicians and public officials who have the feeling of responsibility or accountability to the public, who eventually are taxpayers and voters. Therefore, I use this event as another opportunity to invite all the political actors to put the functional institution before their party interests. Only through commitment to the rule of law and its fundamental principles can we hope that we can achieve progress in fighting corruption and building a strong state which is resistant to outer impacts from other states and to organized crime. Eventually, I wish to thank our NGO partners, Vanja, for initiating the anti-corruption agenda in Montenegro. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you especially for addressing us in our language. Once again, President of the Parliament, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this International Day of Fighting Corruption we celebrate without too many reasons for optimism, apart from the work of the special state prosecutor arresting a high official. Although we don't know what the epilogue will be in the court, fighting corruption usually is political marketing, empty promises, and crucial reforms are still lacking. Today's conference is committed to political corruption because it is a source of every other corruption. When we have people in power in a lawful manner, then it is easier to resort to other forms of abuse of power and crime. Therefore, there is no small political corruption, but when you accept the principle that the vote is goods that has price, then you violate elections as a basis of democracy. That's why I will speak just about political corruption, although there are other fields where corruption causes incorrigible consequences. We speak about abuses on electoral campaigns for years, and we mainly mentioned the previous regime and the affairs of recording envelope donations from chronics that haven't been researched. We expected that the new government, new authorities will deal with disclosing such practices and their sanctioning. Instead, they have just taken over some of those practices. Therefore, they did not, that's the reason why they didn't amend the law on financing political entities and electoral campaigns, which we together criticized while they were opposition, because it enabled the previous government to corrupt voters. But now, when they control state funds, they don't see this law as a problem anymore, but as an opportunity to build party infrastructure and influence the will of voters through public funds. Local elections have shown that state institutions drastically increased expenses in the pre-election period. They also paid social benefits from budget reserves, and they used to criticize it in the past. The new authorities paid subsidies and built local roads before the elections. They had massive employments in state bodies, which hide more data than the previous regime. During the local election campaign, the government proposed and the majority adopted the review of the state budget and increased significantly the expenses through which they can influence the voters. We didn't record such a practice in the previous 3 decades. So electoral advantages were used at the state level by the new authorities and the old government at the local elections. And therefore, it is clear that there is still not political will to amend the law on financing of political entities and electoral campaigns that regulate the use of public funds. However, it's not better in other fields that this law regulates. Actually, for 2 years, the parties have got 17 million euros from public funds, which made more than 80% of their total declared official revenues. For half of this money, for more than 8.5 million euros, we don't know how it has been spent because the parties do not, they hide this data. We monitor the elections and collect the data on the expenses of parties in the campaign, but during their regular vote. And we publish all the information on our site, chistacampania.me, where citizens and the media and all those interested can see the costs and individual transactions of political parties. Based on these data, we established that most of the parties increased the cost of their regular work in the pre-election period or hid real costs of electoral campaigns. Those were expenses for per diem, telephones, food, beverages, and they did not report these. It is a special concern that some political structures did not pay several hundreds of thousands of euros of costs of the electoral campaign, even 2 years after the parliamentary elections, and this mainly to contractors from abroad. That can be an indicator of unlawful financing from abroad and hidden or undeclared and therefore unlawful donations. It is even more concerning that these issues have not been dealt by the anti-corruption agency. The institution continued to be a part of the problem. Owing to their interpretation of the law, they enabled foreign influence on financing elections through non-transparent purchase of premises for political marketing in the media registered abroad. Rare controls did not meet the purpose, even at the last elections, local elections, and the ones before. Therefore, we still witness the same pattern of behavior of both institutions and political parties. So the authorities have changed, but the bad practices have remained. That's why we're here to talk with the representatives of parliamentary political parties and their plans for the reforms before possible extraordinary and regular presidential elections. For the amendment of this law, it takes only 41 votes, and therefore the obstruction by any political party from the opposition cannot be a reason for not amending this law and cannot be an excuse for the lack of reforms. If they want to regain trust of citizens into elections and political parties, they now have the opportunity to show that through concrete activities by amending the law on financing political entities and electoral campaigns, now when it limits them, not the other side. Waiting for the reform of the law, we have done full analysis that you can find within the materials for this conference. And we hope that those will increase the transparency of the financing of political parties. But without the change of the law that will ensure that political parties are responsible to inform the public, the system cannot depend on the NGO sector, because only 2 years after the parliamentary elections, we are providing some data on their financing. And that is what the citizens should know even before they decide on who to vote for. It's up to you, I mean you, the parliamentary majority, you have the additional responsibility that you implement what you criticized when you were in the opposition and limit yourselves in abuse of public funds and impose on yourself the need to be transparent when it comes to your financing and therefore to financing of all political parties. Here with us are numerous experts from whose experience we can learn a lot, as well as colleagues from the civil sector that will speak about the problems identified in the previous elections. I wish to thank donors who enable us to organize this event, but also to collect data, do the analysis that you will find in your conference materials. The National Organization for Democracy the Embassy of Switzerland in southern Montenegro, and the Office of the European Commission Brussels, embassies of Germany and UK. I wish to thank my team was committed to organizing this conference, especially Bartol, Mariana, Milan, Igor, and others, and of course to you who have come to this conference. And please, an applause for their efforts. Thank you.
Želim vam uspješan rad I hvala vam još jednom.
I wish you successful work and thanks once again.